Hello everyone. Today is December 15th in the USA, and that is the birth anniversary of Professor Maurice Wilkins, a Nobel laureate. Many people would recall that Watson and Crick won the Nobel Prize in 1962 in the field of physiology and medicine for the discovery of the structure of DNA. But few might know that Professor Maurice Wilkins co-shared that very Nobel Prize with Watson and Crick for his experimental work in crystallography that aided the determination of the DNA structure. Professor Maurice Wilkins is one of the earliest to move from physics to molecular biology, then a fledgling new field. This video is a small remembrance of Professor Maurice Wilkins, his fundamental and stellar contribution to molecular biology, and also to recapitulate my association with him. I had the pleasure and fortune of meeting Professor Maurice Wilkins for the first time in the summer of 1985. I had gone to London to try and get Professor Maurice Wilkins and Professor David Bohm to go for a World Congress on the Synthesis of Science and Religion that I was organizing for the Bhaktivedanta Institute in Mumbai in '86. I had written ahead of time and got an appointment to meet him, and he was kind enough to meet with me. It turned out that he couldn't go to the conference because of his busy schedule in '86, but at my request, he was willing to grant an interview on the topic of science and religion. I did record that interview, and later it was published as a part of a book titled Interviews with Nobel Laureates and Other Scholars on the Topic of Science and Religion. I also met him several times in my subsequent visits to London. I found Professor Maurice Wilkins to be a very kind and gentle scholar who was interested in a lot of topics. We discussed with him the history of the field of genetics and his own contributions to it. But we also discussed other topics concerning religion. Even though I was only in my 30s and he was in his 70s, he was kind enough to discuss with me many of these topics in depth. I remember during these discussions, I mentioned to him that the Sanskrit term for scriptures is Vedas, which literally means book of knowledge, not a book of faith. And he said, yeah, one problem I have with religion is that they present, their books as revealing all knowledge about everything. And this leaves human beings with no role for acquisition of knowledge. Whereas science thrives on acquiring new knowledge through experimentation, observation, and theorizing. I told him the fact that Vedas, for example, is presented as a book of knowledge doesn't really mean that we have nothing to do to obtain knowledge. And he said, how so? So I tried to give him a simple example. I asked him, do you know there is an Indian eatable called chapati? Unfortunately, he didn't know about it. And so I told him that if you wanted to make chapati, one way is to go into the kitchen and randomly start mixing all the ingredients to see if you get chapati. Would that be a good way to try and make a chapati? He said no. And I said, if we try that method, even if in the improbable case of we finding the right ingredients, the right procedure to mix them and make chapati, we still would have no way of confirming that we have made chapati. He agreed. I then suggested to him that the right way would be to actually get the recipe for making the chapati from someone who knows it authoritatively and follow the recipe and make the chapati. In other words, merely because someone gave us a recipe, it doesn't mean that we have nothing more to do to actually make a chapati and enjoy it. Similarly, I suggested that although the Vedas give full knowledge of the material world and other realms, in order for us to actually obtain this knowledge on a first-person basis and to verify it, we still have to follow a lot of procedure, and that's broadly called as, Bhakti Yoga. And Professor Wilkins said that that makes sense. We also discussed a lot of topics in biology, and one particular topic I remember discussing was the role of information. Why is it that the information contained in the DNA goes from DNA to the formation of RNA and to the synthesis of proteins, but there is no information flow for the reverse to occur, namely from proteins we synthesize RNA and then we synthesize DNA. Actually, years later, I myself published a paper on this very topic, on the central dogma of molecular biology, which talks about this one-sided information flow, in a conference in Brazil. Of course, at the time I discussed with Professor Maurice Wilkins, I never imagined that I would be presenting a paper on this. In fact, right now I'm also guiding a PhD thesis on the topic of the nature of life and information in modern biology.